Welcome to Dweller of the Dark. We are a channel honoring the yellowed and blackened bones of many prominent authors. We will be digging up several obscure, strange, and forgotten authors who influenced many of the great horror, science fiction, and fantasy writers today. More tales of the horrifying, obscure, strange, and forgotten are climbing out of the tombs. Subscribe, comment, like, donate, or I'll send Thaddeus Forge to steal your heathen soul. Unknown horror masters, send us ghoulish delights for the Skull and Bones collection. Your pound of writer's flesh will continue to feed our ghouls for now. Books, websites, podcast, in the links below. Children of Horror, Legion of Ghouls. Tonight, it's a full moon, a crimson moon, on the planet Lunaris. Our new science fiction mystery horror tale is devilishly devoted to the fans. Thank you for your continued support. Enjoy! Crimson Moon. First written July 30th, 2023. The distant stars always seemed a little colder in the Polaris galaxy to Detective Trevor Richter. With each passing minute, as he traveled across the borders of its ominous outer reach, their silver gleam sent chilled reminders that an unsolved murder lay in wait somewhere in that vast, violent cosmos. As he guided his spacecraft down from those star-gemmed heavens to the clouded warmth of the planet Lunaris, he gazed in awe at the sweeping vistas of the Blackstone Mountains and fog-filled forest. Shivering from an icy chill as he studied the snow-capped peaks, Trevor nodded over to his investigative crew, then eased the ship's controls, dropping them into the lower atmosphere of Lunaris. A crew-cut, militant-looking man, Detective Robert Dubois, nodded over to Trevor. Rubbing the side of his freshly trimmed blonde hair, Robert adjusted the ship's sensors for the team to scan the population below. Both looked out with a sense of unease on the endless sway of pines from Lunaris' forbidding forest. Furrowing his brow and glancing back to check the ship's integrity for descent, Robert asked, puzzled, "Sir, why did they wait so long to investigate the murder? It's been what? At least 7 years." Trevor shrugged as their shuttle eased to dock. I asked the same question to Chief Parker. He said there was some kind of celestial event, meteor shower or solar flare, that made getting down here 7 years ago impossible. That's where I have questions, Detective Richter. Why not fly in and investigate the scene and interview the witnesses after the event was over? The lunar event that Chief Parker spoke of is only a month every 7 years. He took a sigh and growled, "It feels like a cover-up, if you don't mind me saying." Robert pointed to an advancing runway in the middle of a forested compound. A congregation of Lunaris council members were walking solemnly up a long gray dock to their police craft. Narrowing his blue eyes, Trevor looked from the council and pointed up to the snow-capped mountains of Lunaris. I have the same misgivings. Hell, if they were worried about radiation, another meteor, or whatever, they could have sent out the police drones or robots to check on things. He rolled his eyes to the team. You know what that clown, Chief Parker, said? Let me guess, sir. We don't have the budget to just send robots or drones to canvass every galaxy? A vibrant brunette woman, Imperial Federation Lieutenant Karen Kowalski, smirked to both men as she unbuckled from her seat. They all shook their heads. You guessed it, Lieutenant Kowalski. Trevor took a deep sigh as they exited the spacecraft, then under his breath to the small group of police investigators. By the looks of that grumpy council, we won't be here long. Let's try and do the walkthrough and wrap up this case by 5. Lieutenant Kowalski looked over to Robert and smirked. I agree with Detective Dubois. There's something fishy going on for sure. That lunar event you spoke of, the Crimson Moon, shouldn't have caused the delay. We've flown through solar flares and meteor showers a dozen times worse for far less. Robert looked from Karen back to Trevor as they exited the spacecraft in disbelief. Did you just say we have 3 hours to investigate, boss? Protesting, Robert exclaimed. 3 hours ain't enough time.
3 hours is all you detectives have before the Crimson Lunar rise.
A lumbering hulk of a man with pale, frosted-colored eyes and a silver beard pointed to the distant horizon. Trevor guessed the lumberjack of a man was over 6 feet tall.
I cannot promise your safety once Lunaris goes dark and the blood moon rises.
Sir, our team doesn't plan to be out here any longer than we have to. Though, we weren't advised of any celestial events that could cause us issues. Trevor looked out toward the same horizon. In the distance, he could make out the sun illuminated, but transparent image of a crimson moon awaiting to ascend the night sky. The man with the frosted eyes stared back dismissively.
Of course, you would know, Detective
Richter, and this is my team. Trevor interrupted, trying to push the obvious leader of the group out of sorts. He had to assert control of the investigation now, or the whole investigation could spin out of his control. He ushered forward Robert and Karen and introduced them. This is Detective Dubois and Imperial Federation Lieutenant Kowalski. And you are?
A tired old man who doesn't suffer fools on my hostile planet.
Huh. He huffed under his breath, seeing that Trevor wanted more than that.
I'm Gerald Romulus, the Alpha here. That's a new one. Not General High Council, or Supreme Leader, or Governor, but the Alpha?
Robert narrowed his eyes and looked over to Trevor. Gerald ushered the team inside the walled confines of his city. Trevor was impressed by the immense security of the green granite stone and imposing facade. In their walk past titanium speared gates, Gerald added,
Well, my official title would be Governor of the Lunaris Outpost. But on Lunaris, we don't recognize conventional direction in our discourse. But call me Governor if you must.
You have an immense system for defense, sir. This has to be one of the most fortified towns I've seen in quite a while. Governor Romanus, have y'all had trouble in the past? Karen looked around wide-eyed at the colossal security measures of Lunaris. They walked toward a silver, circular structure that was Gerald's office, opening an intricately carved door that matched the Roman depiction of Romulus and Remus back on the planet Earth. He answered, We protect our flock as best we can. The wildlife can be quite deadly if you drop your guard. Gerald escorted the team to a large oaken table that was set in a room with a grandeur thick-glassed bay window. A magnificent mountainous view of emerald pines and ancient oaks awaited the team as they sat at the table. Gerald smiled broadly as he saw the team's eyes transfixed on the view. I know it's stunning. When I came here 80 years ago, I thought I'd found heaven. It reminds me of the historical archives of Earth, 1,000 years ago. The planet had such beautiful green trees and pristine raging rivers. Karen put a hand to her mouth in awe as she sat. Gerald looked on his guest and nodded politely. It's been a long trip for you folks. I went ahead and had my personal cook prepare drinks and meals for you before you leave. Leave, Governor? We have an investigation to go over. We won't be leaving anytime soon. Trevor could see the man was being obstinate. He didn't like it. In his experience, when people rushed you to wrap up an investigation, especially a politician, it meant they had something to hide. Besides, why the rush? I don't know about you, Lieutenant Kowalski and Detective Dubois, but we might need rooms for the night. Sounds good to me, Detective Richter. This would be an epic place to have a holiday once we wrap up the case. Robert leaned back in his chair and crossed his arms with a smirk.
Looks can be deceiving, Detective Dubois. That looks like pristine wilderness to you now. But when
Gerald paused and put his head down, clenching his hands together in prayer as he clenched his teeth. He changed course.
Ah, the food and drinks have arrived. The honey-suckling pig is the finest across 10 galaxies. I truly hope you enjoy.
Trevor wasn't swayed by the food and the pleasantries of Gerald. Look, Governor Romanus, we have a job to do. I have so many questions about this case, I don't even know where to begin. The time that has passed to investigate the murder of Clark Lofton is ridiculous. Why did your outpost wait so long to report the murder? Gerald, undeterred, waved for an orange beverage in a smoking glass. Once the drink had arrived, he sipped slowly and put both his hands on the glass. Uneasily, Trevor made a note of the hands. Somehow, they seemed different than in the hour since they first met. He couldn't quite place what was wrong with Gerald's hands at first. Then he narrowed his gaze on the fingers as the hands tapped the glass methodically and patiently. Call me crazy, but I'd swear his hands have lengthened in the last hour, and his fingernails have too. Gerald somehow seemed to sense Trevor's concern.
Is something wrong, Detective Richter?
Trevor looked on Gerald's frosted eyes. The pupils seemed to have altered as well in the waning light of Lunaris's afternoon sun. They seemed a yellowish brown. Recomposing himself, Trevor regrouped and circled back in their conversation. No, or you didn't answer my question. Gerald stood, carrying his orange drink in his hands. He walked and looked out on the forest of Lunaris, then took another sip of the smoky drink. For starters, I was attacked and almost torn apart by a local animal when Clark Lofton was murdered. Our whole community was laid sieged by the forest beasts. His eyes winced as he added, as I told your Detective Dubois a moment ago, the peaceful forest of Lunaris can be deceiving. Never let your guard down out here. I never let my guard down anywhere. Trevor kept an icy steel tone in his voice. It was the detached, cold, and analytical voice of a planetary law enforcement officer. Where was the murder committed? Let us see the crime scene, take a few photos, and write up our concluding report. Then we'll leave you in peace. I'm 3 paws ahead of you, Detective Richter. Gerald ushered a muscular assistant to enter the dining room. He looked over to Trevor and instantly sent a neural message to his brain link with all the images of the scene. Then the man who introduced himself as Remy added a private message.
Don't trust him, but I will implore you to heed his words and leave now before the crimson moon ascends.
Trevor, stunned by the pictures, for these were far more graphic than the cursory ones Chief Parker had given him, doggedly asked telepathically, "What's the deal with the moon? Why is it so important that we leave?"
I'll answer for Remy, Detective Richter.
Trevor looked as Gerald had turned from the window. He saw the sun was an hour from setting, but more importantly, the crimson moon had begun a strange rise. Its congealed red image reminded Trevor of the clotted, ripped corpse in Remy's neural download. Gerald's eyes were fully changed. It had not been a trick of the light. They had taken on a lupine appearance. There was a gravel-like resonance in Gerald's voice as well. But more importantly, to the immediate safety of Trevor's team, Gerald's hands seemed more like talons than hands now. His hands have changed. It wasn't a trick of the light or my imagination. He's some kind of shapeshifter. But those are supposed to be extinct. As if reading his thoughts, Robert, with sweat on his brow and a stammer in his voice, whispered,
"You caught his hands, Detective Richter? They changed."
Trevor raised a cool brow, not letting on he was terrified. "I saw." He tapped lightly and nonchalantly on the table. The team knew when Trevor Richter tapped on a table, it meant gun up for trouble. In the moment, he heard Lieutenant Kowalski fidgeting with her gun and thought, "Now is not the time to freeze up, Lieutenant. You could get us all killed." Gerald Romanus smiled as saliva dripped slowly from his mouth. His square, pearl-white teeth had changed as well. The canines had lengthened. His face had stretched slightly outward.
The crimson moon of Lunaris exerts a powerful force on some of our more unique inhabitants. It's been that way since settlers came here thousands of years ago. It affects some, and not all. Hell, this planet may be the sole source of the Wendigo or werewolf legends of ancient Earth. The infection to what we call the wolf gene doesn't happen overnight. It could turn you in one night, or years later, the longer you live on Lunaris. Just as any illness can eventually change or kill you.
"And you caught the illness and killed Clark Lofton 7 years ago?" Karen asked timidly. As Trevor's heart raced, he could tell she was buying the team time to coordinate an attack when, not if, the killer pounced.
No. Clark, the poor soul, was infected. I saved him by killing him. But there was an unforeseen complication of my heroics.
Gerald looked back out toward the rising crimson moon and the darkening mountainous forest before him. With his throat as coarse as sandpaper and his right hand shaking, Trevor kept a hand on his blaster, ready to shoot the changing man. What was the complication?
I was bit.
Gerald's voice was a full, raging growl. The golden sun had set, and dusk was upon Lunaris. The crimson moon had made its ascent, and the silhouette of Gerald Romanus before the hapless detectives had changed from a towering man to the terrifying visage
of a werewolf.
The beast, just as they had done for centuries in the ancient legends, let out a blood-curdling howl to the blood-filled orb of the crimson moon. With a powerful turn and leap, Gerald made a killing lunge toward Karen and Robert. Robert raised and fired his silver halide blaster, cutting off one of the werewolf's arms, but not before the other savage talon eviscerated his abdomen, dropping guts and launching splatters of blood in its swipe. Trying to hold his organs in, Robert dropped his blaster as the ravenous beast landed its teeth into his throat and ripped it out. Trevor had fallen back against the wall, firing midway in his drop away from the werewolf. His first purpose blast of laser fire had went awry and almost killed Karen. But as the werewolf leaped from the ripped corpse of Robert to kill Karen, Trevor got off 2 more blinding but deadly accurate shots, cutting Gerald, the werewolf, in half. The upper, smoking and laser-singed torso landed on a blood-soaked Karen. Jumping to his feet, Trevor ran toward the beast and fired several more silver halide laser blasts, disintegrating the creature per the ancient protocols of Earth. Then he kicked the charred torso off the top of Lieutenant Kowalski. "Are you okay? He didn't bite you." "I'm fine, Detective Richter. I swear, I haven't been bit." Covered in blood, Karen slipped twice, trying to stand. On her third attempt, Trevor gave her a lift up while awaiting and anticipating more werewolves. Oh, poor Robert. He was a good kid. Trevor took in the scene of the carnage. He looked out to the rising crimson moon over the forest. He clenched his jaw in frustration. There may be more. There were fast footsteps moving in the darkness of the room. Wiping blood out of her eyes, Karen looked and raised her blaster to fire. "Ma'am, are you okay?" whispered Remy in the darkness. Trevor glanced over to a hidden safe room near the dining area where Remy had scurried from. "We are okay now," Trevor answered for both of them. He made one more glance at Robert, then incinerated him with the blaster. Grimly, he asked, "How many are infected, Remy?" "We honestly don't know, sir. That's why, for the full month of the Crimson Moon, we stay locked indoors. No one dares to leave their homes. It's the best method we have found for isolating the wolf virus. If someone turns in a locked compound, then just that group dies, and not the whole community." Remy walked over to the ashes that had once been his boss. Stooping down, he shook his head, then sobbed. "Gerald Romanus was a great leader and friend. He saved countless lives with the plans he implemented. I will miss him." Karen wiped off more blood on her face with a nearby napkin, groaning in disgust. "Oh, so there's no way for us to leave the compound. Is that what I'm getting from you?" "You are correct, Lieutenant Kowalski. We are locked in by the failsafe of the AI system once the moon rises. Count yourself lucky to be in the most secure place on Lunaris right now." Remy nodded to a wall where a wash area and a woman's clothing rack produced itself with his Neuralink nod. Karen walked over to wash and change. 3 hours later, long after the compound computer system cleaned away the remnants of Gerald and Robert, Trevor sat and sipped his 4th glass of 1,000-year Appleton rum. He looked out on the silver shimmer of the winding river with glossy, drunken eyes. Inebriated, with his thoughts swirling, he caught glimpses of a pack of werewolves running in the shadows of the red-lit forest. Then he cast a somber glance up to the crimson moon of Lunaris. He watched the molten scarlet swirl as the moon continued its climb across the heavens. Karen walked in wearing a stunning Lunaris dress of glimmering silver. She seemed to stride with an elegance that Trevor had never paid attention to before. He glanced to his right as she stood before the view of the endless magical forest and the deathly red moon. In his gaze, he sought to find Remy. The young man seemed to be moving and reorganizing chairs in the next room with the locked-in staff. He turned from the crimson moon and went to stand and get another spiced Jamaican rum. As he staggered and walked over to the bar, Trevor caught an unpleasant odor. It was the stench of wet dog behind him. It was an eye-watering and stifling smell. Out loud, he said, slurring his words a little, "Lieutenant Kowalski, I think you need another shower." "I took two, Detective Richter." There was something in the way she said two that gave Trevor a growing sense of unease. Easing his hand down to his blaster, he gulped. Oh well, this planet brings out the worst in us, you know. Are you sure you are okay? He heard the click of something like plastic, maybe enamel, possibly teeth. He felt cold slime dripping on his neck. Chills ran down his spine, and the hair on his neck stood as he felt the hot breath of Karen panting behind him. Then he heard her howl and lost his bowels. Before Detective Trevor Richter could duck down and blast the she-wolf, a clawed hand swept in from a towering black silhouette and ripped his head clean off. As his head tumbled and flopped to the floor, Trevor recalled Karen's growling, mumbled words as his lifeless eyes twitched. "Trevor, dear, I lied. But you're right about one last thing. Lunaris does bring out the worst in me."
Thank you for listening.
Have a great night.